Refusal Criteria. Chapter 2. Pounding the Ground. The noonday sun electrocuted his eyes as he strained them open to a squint. He rolled over onto his side in the tall, wiry brome grass, shielded his eyes with his hands, and managed to open them completely. Jamie sat with her back against a large walnut tree, reading some kind of one-with-the-world Dalai Lama crap that she loved so much. God, she was some kind of beautiful, with her reading glasses slid down perilously close to the end of her nose. Her creamy legs, leading down to her button toes, in a perfect line at the end of her sandals. It's funny, they had been married 12 years, and he still could not take his eyes off her. Wherever they were, he felt as if they were the only two people in the room. He sat up, resting on his hands, with his straightened arms behind him, and his outstretched legs crossed in front of him. She looked over at him and gave him a naughty look after sheepishly reading his mind and turned back to her book. She was sitting over his right shoulder as he panned the rolling field in front of him. His eyes landed on Chris and Philip. She was 10 and he was 8. They are the best kids a guy could ever have. She was thoughtful and strictly obedient, always had been. Philip was mischievous, but a harsh word could bring him to tears, and he was deeply loving, always had been. They were rolling and tickling in the tall grass, as Chris so often did to Philip. Philip's delicate chuckle echoed through the hills. It was truly enchanting, like water trickling through a brook. It made the world smile. His eyes continued left to the grove of oak trees by which the Olds 88 was parked. He stared at that car and knew that the source of his recent nightmares was sitting in the trunk of it. At that moment, he decided that enough was enough. He was sick of that damn thing. He was sick of thinking about it all the time. He was sick of worrying about it. The time had come to get rid of it. In the middle of the oak grove was a crevice. When he was a boy, it was a small lake. Then suddenly one morning it was dry. Years later, as a teen, he explored the snaky crevice and found a hole barely big enough to crawl into that led to a cavern. The cavern was about as large as a living room and as deep as a 2-story house. At the bottom was a pool of water that was so clear you could see the cave continue on for 50 feet under the surface and disappear into the earth. The walls of the cave were completely vertical and plastered with mud. If a person fell in, they would never get out. It was the perfect place. He would get up, walk to the trunk of the car, take that damn thing out, and throw it into the hole. Done. Over. Richey practically jumped to his feet and half walked, half skipped to the car. He took a good long look around to make sure no one was watching. As he turned, he caught a sound floating on the wind that made the hair stand up on the back of his neck. With the key in the trunk, he froze in mid-turn to listen. He heard it again. It was a tingle like the sound of a dinner triangle being frantically worked far in the distance, but coming closer now. He had to move quickly, so he twisted the key, flung the trunk open, grabbed the duffel bag. Then he slammed the lid shut and spun to sprint toward the grove of trees concealing the crevice. As soon as he lunged forward, he was immediately jerked backwards so suddenly that his upper body bounced off of the trunk lid, keys flying, and he fell to the ground. He had slammed that lid closed on his sleeve, and now he was stuck to the car with the bag in plain sight for all to see. The sound was much louder now and much closer. Richey scanned the ground looking for the keys. He spotted them glimmering in the sun, but they had been flung too far towards the oak grove to reach when he had tried to bolt in that direction. He quickly began working the zipper of his windbreaker. The zipper was stuck tight, and he could not break it free with only one hand. The ringing was raucous now, to the point where he could feel the car shake like a washer and spin cycle every time it rang. He turned to hail Jamie for help and froze in horror. Jamie had a child by each hand, and they were smiling and running towards him, her wiry legs bounding playfully like a deer through the tall grass. But he was not looking at her, for over her shoulder was a pack of 7 gray wolves closing ground quickly behind them with their heavy paws pounding the earth. He jerked frantically, practically dislocating his shoulder trying to break free, but all he could do was reach out in that direction with his free arm and scream as he watched the wolves descend upon them. The beasts were jerking and shaking them in their clenched jaws in a feeding frenzy tug of war. Richey jerked up to a sitting position on the bed so quickly that he bounced, nearly catching air. The dinner bell chiming was the phone ringing at 100 decibels. He picked it up more to stop the noise than to see who it was. It was not necessary to put the receiver to his ear to hear the owner yelling, "That's it! I'm calling the police!" "No, please, I am walking out the door right now. You can watch me. I am sorry. Please don't call the police." Richey hung up quickly and hurried through the door. Byron was watching him as he walked briskly toward the office. Byron was relieved to have him out of the room, but was still upset and wanted the man off the property altogether without having the police show up. "Here is your receipt. Now leave here and do not come back." Richey patiently scanned the document and returned it to Byron. "You charged me for 3 days," Richey stated in confusion. "You have been here for 3 days." Richey got it. This was some kind of shakedown since the manager knew Richey did not want the police involved. He reached for his wallet and pulled out 3 Ben Franklins. "It has already been charged to your credit card. Just go." "What are you talking about? I paid you cash. The card was for incidentals, of which I had none. You paid me cash for 1 night, not 3. For all I knew, you were dead in there, so I billed it. I don't have to explain myself to you. I am within my legal rights." "When? When did you run the charge?" "An hour ago, before I went to your room." "You idiot! You have no idea what you've done." Richey assessed the time quickly and concluded he still had a chance to make a run for it. He turned and bolted through the storefront door, nearly ripping it off the hinges, jumped in the olds and spun in the gravel until his tires chirped onto the paved outer belt road. Avoiding the highway, Richey barreled down the road at 90 until he locked up his brakes, screeching to a smoking stop, and then floored it as he turned off on the first paved road he came to. He knew it would be harder to smell his trail on dirt roads, but right now he had to put miles between himself and the hotel. The olds popped over hills and squealed around curves as Richey's eyes stayed glued to the rearview mirror, watching the road disappear in lengthy curves behind him. His mouth moved quietly, whispering lines from a poem that'd been stuck in his head. Richey did not know the whole poem, or who wrote it, or even where he had read it, but it made him feel better to repeat the verses aloud over and over again. When the song of the pack resounds in the woods, and the notes drip bright red with the kill, then you'll sink to your knees, exhausted at last, feel the beat of your heart slow and still.